8 fantasy show. Chris Randone, Manny Laura. We're going to be going ahead and going into week 8, breaking down the slate, going over some things with strategy and ownership, and really just trying to figure out the best plays for this week, 48 hours till lock. So, Manny, good morning, man. How are you?
Yeah, great. Good morning. It's a fun time because we technically have all three sports going, even though we're not playing one of them, right? MLB, but still the World Series there, and then football and basketball right in the middle of things. So yeah, a lot of fun, man. A lot of DFS pretty much every day. I know for you guys, the same way it is for me, is just a bunch of content. It feels like 24/7. We're constantly either researching or on camera or talking about plays or helping others. And dude, I love it. I love it. It's what I live for. And obviously now talking another football slate. So going to be pretty fun on Sunday.
Yeah, so much content's being produced right now. I mean, it seems like it's overtime with the amount of content that Osmo and the rest of the team is just producing on a day-to-day basis. If you guys haven't checked out the content schedule, you can always go to osmo.com, look under the actual sports. There's content schedules. Nolan Kelly does a great job of breaking down all the shows at what times. And so that way you're up to date. And don't forget, too, you can always click the notification button here, subscribe. And so that way you're notified of when every show is actually airing, and you'll be on schedule at the same time with us. You guys, before we go into this breakdown and go into in-depth analysis of Week 8, don't forget our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. They got a nice little tournament going on again this week. It's the 250K baller, 25K to first. Now you can also do the CSV upload. So, now it's no more hand building. If you want to get in more entries, max it out, and be able to upload your lineups, you can do so now. But if you do, go ahead and join yahoo.com, Daily Fantasy Sports. Use the code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. It'll get you, I think it's $30 in Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports rewards. I think it's called YSRP. I forget the terminology for it. But go ahead, if this is your first time signing up, use that promo code. And that gets you 3 entries into the NFL 250K baller, guys. So Week 8, Manny. First 7 weeks, what I've learned the most is that sometimes defenses and the matchups don't matter. Things change on a week-to-week basis. Sometimes the greatest chalk in the world isn't the greatest chalk. But Manny, I mean, before we go into this, what have you kind of processed and digested these first 7 weeks?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of that, right? I do the show on Monday with Laffy as well, where we kind of go over what happens the previous week, and every time it's, man, really? I mean, that was the best possible matchup on the board. Like, say, like an Ingram versus Arizona. Really, one catch is all he got, and that's like the best matchup possible for such a good tight end. So, in a sense, you're right. It does feel like that, where matchups don't really matter, but we have to remember kind of that we're playing percentages, right? And we're not always going to be completely accurate. We're not always going to know exactly what's going to happen on Sunday. Now we'd all have the same lineup. So just to kind of stay grounded and know that, there is variance in this sport, and there's a ton of it. I always reference, and we always joke around, dude, it's 11 on 11, not a 5 on 5, not a 2 on 2, definitely not a 1 on 1. So it's really tough to say what someone's projection can look like on a weekly basis without factoring in, a ton of, random events during the game. So for me, it's just try to differentiate as much, not expose yourself to too much risk if you don't want to, and just let the ball fall where it may. I mean, hopefully we put ourselves in good enough spots where, we're in a position to maybe get that big 1% score, regardless of variance one of these weeks. So just stay grounded and keep grinding, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, there is a lot of variance in this sport, and you can have your process, and you can play great players and do everything right, but at the end of the day, it's these players need to perform, and we're not in control of that. So I think if you're doing the right things, and if you're finding the right plays, and you're constructing the right lineups, I think the best advice would be just to keep doing what you're doing. Don't switch it up. Don't try to adjust because you're not necessarily being profitable. Just know that maybe sometimes it takes time, or it's patience. I mean, the variance is just something that we can't control in this sport. So definitely love that advice. Week 8 is very interesting. I was looking at the matchups, my plane ride last night, looking at the updated ownership, and really excited to kind of talk about this slate. I feel like there's some good chalk. I feel like there's maybe some plays that people aren't necessarily looking at that I definitely want to break down. And I guess we'll go into the first game, Manny. Seattle at Atlanta. Right now, I guess now they have a line, I believe. It's Falcons plus 3.5. I don't know if that's correct, but I'm seeing that on a couple sites. The over-under is 53.5 from what I'm seeing. Russell Wilson last week, little bit of a struggle through his first interception of the season. Chris Carson still got the workload, however, wasn't as necessarily producing as much as anticipated in his projection model. How do we feel about this? And also, how do we feel about the Falcons side of the ball, Manny, with Ryan potentially being out in this passing game?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I think the line dropped again because, or came a little bit closer because, although he hasn't practiced, they say Matt Ryan's going to play. I don't know how, but yeah, guys like that don't really need practice, right? They've been in this offense forever, their whole careers. Like connections with the whole receiving core is, I mean, it's there. You don't need to do anything special from week to week to get ready, really, outside of just game plan for your week. So if he really does go, I still have this being as one of the most interesting games or ones that you want the most pieces of, really, right? It's the only one with over a 50 total, if depending where you're looking at the Detroit New York game. So for me, it's you have to have a piece of both sides, right? Obviously, Russell Wilson has played incredible. Chris Carson and his volume is really tough to pass up from week to week. And if he stays around that 7K mark, by the way, this is, if we're talking DK, this is the most expensive price tag of the season. So careful where you're rostering him. But I still think for the 20 plus touches, 25 touches you're getting per week from Carson, possibly more. He's had weeks of 28 touches. I think, you can go back there if you wanted to. We've said it over and over. Atlanta is one of the best matchups for every single position, and it's not going to stop this week. So Carson, Wilson, Metcalf, Lockett, all very much in play for me.
Yeah, I think with Carson, I think one thing to note is that even though he only had 65 yards last week, he still had 21 carries. He still had 5 targets, a huge role in this offense. But Rashad Penny didn't even touch the ball. No carries, no catches. I mean, I think people a few weeks ago were saying how, one more fumble and Carson's going to be pulled. And it's been the complete opposite.
Yep.
They have the utmost confidence in him. He's a workhorse. And even though Atlanta's rush defense doesn't give up as much as we would like to see compared to other defenses to the running back position, I believe that the way that this game goes, and if Matt Ryan doesn't play, I think we don't even see really a close of a game, in my opinion. I don't think that the Atlanta offense will be as valuable with Matt Ryan off the field. And you made a great point, though. I would say the quarterback position is probably the only position of someone who's a vet, who's been in this for a long time, that doesn't necessarily need to practice. Or missing practice doesn't necessarily hurt him. But I want to ask you, from the offensive side of the Falcons, if we see this as a game where maybe it gets a little bit out of hand, and obviously there's some value weapons there in Ridley and Jones, regardless if Matt Ryan plays or not, if we're looking for a team that has to play catch up, do we see Julio Jones or Ridley being valuable here for the wide receiver spot?
Yeah, for sure. I think the trade opens up Ridley to be the solidify, or the like, he is the number 2 now, right? Like, I think that role is so solidified for him to the point where, we saw in previous weeks it could be Sanu somehow getting receptions and yards and touchdowns, to the point where, man, it kind of bumped down. Well, at least I did. I bumped down a little bit Ridley's projection from week to week, only because there's a third body in there getting, or at least a third receiver getting production. So for me, it's now I only have Ridley as the number 2. Obviously, Hooper and Jones are still the big 2, but now it's just 3 I have to focus on. Makes making groups a little bit easier, makes game stacking a little bit easier. I can kind of dissect the team, with ease now, without having, because like the question for me was every single week, do I play Sanu? Like, why is Sanu here? Like, why does he get 5 catches for 50? Why does he get 6 for 7? Like, it was just annoying in there because no one likes playing Sanu, but whatever. Now he's gone, and now you have a clear 3 that you want to pair with Matt Ryan. So yeah, for sure. Especially Austin Hooper. I think he is probably the top tight end on the slate.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, with Sanu being gone now, there's obviously a few more targets to go around. And I mean, your 3 main guys are Hooper, Jones, and Ridley. But I wanted to speak on Hooper for a second, because I feel like in this matchup where we see maybe an area that we've seen maybe Seattle struggle over the last few weeks. Not necessarily last week against Mark Andrews, but we saw Ingram blow up against them. And there was another game, I believe, where they gave up a significant amount of production to the tight end position. In this matchup specifically, where there's a huge weakness is in those linebackers, Kendricks and Wagner, in coverage. And if one of these guys are picking up a lot of coverage with Hooper going across the field, this could actually be an upside game for Hooper. And I want to ask you, if Ryan doesn't play, is it still okay to have the confidence in wanting to roster Hooper?
I think so, only because we saw last week, I think all the production for Hooper last week, including the touchdown, was when Matt Ryan got hurt, right? I think for the most part, he had a 0 the entire game. I saw at halftime he had 0. I think halfway through the third he had 0. And then late in that fourth, or whenever Matt Ryan came out, he ended up getting a couple catches on his touchdown. So for me, it's Hooper's still in play. I think all these guys are really well. I don't know to an extent how much Ridley will be, but definitely Julio and Hooper are still on my board if Matt Ryan doesn't play. And then obviously if he does, things are just back to normal. So for me, it's you're still playing Hooper. Also, the Mark Andrews stuff last week, it was a bunch of drops from Mark Andrews too. So that could have been a massive line too. I'm pretty sure he dropped 2 touchdowns there, and they were just clean drops. He just missed them. And if that's the case, you're right. I mean, this team is getting torched by tight ends all of a sudden if Mark Andrews catches that, right? So I think it's still a pretty good spot for Hooper. Again, he's still my number 1 as of right now.
The other side of the passing game that I guess we'll close this game out on is probably the most appealing part of this matchup. And I mean, and that's these two guys from Seattle, and Lockett and Metcalf, against this really, really weak Falcons secondary. I guess we could talk about Isaiah Oliver, someone who has been absolutely torched this year by wide receivers. 383 yards, 3 touchdowns thrown against him. And then, I mean, even Desmond Trufant has given up 4 touchdowns as well. Let me ask you this. With Lockett and Metcalf, which one would be probably the more appealing one for you if you're looking to roster Wilson at quarterback?
It has to be Metcalf, I think, only because Lockett now with his recent production has come up in price, right? He has double-digit fantasy points in every single game except the Arizona game. Beats me how that happens. But he's up towards 7K on DK. His price tag has come up just a little bit across the industry, leaving Metcalf for me at a significant discount from Lockett, who obviously still plays the same amount of snaps. So obviously a big red zone target and a threat downfield a little bit too. I think Metcalf is still fine. So if I had to choose one, I'd go Metcalf, but both are really good plays. And if I'm playing Wilson, I'm inclined to play both really.
So here's the breakdown. Over the last, I guess, 4 weeks, right? We'll look at the last 4 weeks for a sample size. Yeah. Atlanta against the wide receiver 1, 70 yards, 2 touchdowns. But then when you look at the wide receiver 2, a significant difference, giving up 100 yards per game and 4 touchdowns, 22 fantasy points per game to the wide receiver 2. And I'm curious because if Lockett also lines up in the slot position, Atlanta, the last 4 games, believe it or not, has not given up one single touchdown to a slot wide receiver. And so it's interesting. Not necessarily saying don't play these guys. I'm just saying maybe people are conscious of the matchup and maybe thinking that Metcalf might be the better play. We've also seen a decrease in targets to Lockett as well. He's still producing. There's no doubt about it. But I'm just thinking, imagine if he was getting the target production he was getting the first few weeks. I think it would be probably a no-brainer when it comes in regards to Lockett.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do like Metcalf a little bit now. It's not a huge gap, but I do have Metcalf in front of Lockett.
Going into our next game, Manny, Denver at Indianapolis Colts. 6-point favorites for the Colts, man. Over under 43. I heard that little grimacing noise just now. I'm assuming this is a stay away game.
Yeah, I mean, Cortland Sutton. What happens now with no Manny Sanders? Is he a true number 1? I mean, it's still Flacco, dude. Like I don't. This isn't this is a terrible offense. I get it. Cortland Sutton has been better this year, but I barely have. Like I have a list of maybe 10 guys ahead of him. So it's actually not even close. So for me, is if you want someone, it's Sutton on this side, and then On the other side, I mean, I'm still there. I still don't want much from this game, really. If you wanted Ty, I can make a case for him, sure, but that's deep. Those are deep GPP targets. If you're playing 100 plus lineups, yeah, there's absolutely nothing from this game. You look at the running backs. I don't know. I think pretty underrated defenses, if you ask me. Like, yeah, I have nothing in this game at all.
Joe Flacco, he looked absolutely horrible, Manny.
What was that, dude? That was horrible.
We talked about Sam Darnold being horrible, the other night against the Patriots. I mean, you could throw Flacco in that category as well. I mean, just the way his pocket presence was, he looks so uncomfortable. He also looks very unengaged with the offense, and he can't read any defensive scheme, it seems like. So very concerning. And that's what leads me to talk about real quick is, what do you think about the Indianapolis Colts here as a defense?
I mean, yeah, I'm not opposed to that at all. I actually have him as my third defense on the board, and that's probably my favorite play of the entire game. I could see both defenses really, right? Because both defenses seem like they can come up with turnovers, and obviously, it's tough to predict defenses, right? But one has a pretty decent pass rush in the Broncos, and then I don't know, just one has a much better matchup in the Colts to where they're facing an awful quarterback. So would I be surprised if there's a defensive touchdown? No, not at all.
Last week against the Chiefs was the first time this whole season that a cornerback, because the safeties have given up, I think, 2 touchdowns, and a linebacker have given up a touchdown in the passing game. But the first touchdown was Chris Harris throwing against the quarterback for the Broncos defense. So, this past defense is pretty stout when it comes to coverage and giving up, I would say, production to wideouts. But I want to talk about one guy from the Colts side that I think is a sneaky play. And I say that because we look at the line; it's a 6-point line. We look at the matchup. I don't think that Indianapolis, in order to win this game, is going to be able to throw. I think they're going to have to rely on their workhorse of a running back in Marlon Mack. And he's 6,800 on FanDuel, Manny, and on DraftKings, I believe he's 6,100. And yep, he's going to get his maybe 18 carries. I think he's averaging about 18 or 19 carries right now. But there have been moments this year where Denver has, given up some production to the running back position. Not every game, but there has been some games. And so I wanted to ask you, when it comes to this spot, he's not projected to be high owned. I believe he's sub 5% right now. With the way that the game script can go to, if they're looking to manage the clock, it's a home game, 6-point favorites. Obviously, they want to do whatever they can to win. Do you feel as if that maybe Marlon Mack could be a play here?
Maybe, I guess, right? I mean, it's not a terrible run defense. They're, according to DVOA, 13th, kind of middle of the road. But even middle of the road this season has been pretty good rushing defenses, right? So, and obviously not a huge involvement in the passing game, which kind of lowers his floor for me a little bit, to the point where, yeah, if you're talking game script, sure, I guess that's in his favor. But even then, like, I don't think it's a crazy enough spot for me to say I want X amount of Marlon Mack. I just think he's an okay play. Do I have guys ahead of him? Yeah, I mean, we just talked about Chris Carson that I probably like more. There's guys like Fournette on the board, which I like a ton against the Jets. Even maybe to an extent, Sonny Michel, which we'll get to in a little bit. So I don't know. There's a few guys that I like kind of in that range, and I don't know. It's like a whatever spot for Mac. It's not the best, definitely not the worst.
The last guy we'll talk about that I've seen come up the last couple of days just because of the Emmanuel Sanders trade is Deshaun Hamilton. Now, obviously, there's not really much to say about the offensive production because he only has 11 catches on the season. But obviously now he kind of steps into that wide receiver 2 role with Sutton now getting a bump. And Deshaun Hamilton was someone that kind of played out of the slot. But I want to ask you, I mean, is this guy going to be someone that maybe people do somewhere as far as a cheap option for cash, or maybe be that cheap guy in GBP to pay up in other places? Or is this just a stay away play?
Yeah, no, it's just a stay away. Anything that has Flacco throwing to him is a stay away play for me. So I'm just not there. And then it's also a big question mark, right? Like, I get it. Like, he's technically the number 2 or whatever. But I mean, how good is a Flacco number 2 in this league? Like, I don't know. To me, I no real interest. He's definitely not a Manny Sanders. I'll tell you that much.
The next game is probably going to bring up a little bit of emotion for me because it's the Cardinals at the Saints. And I say that, Manny, because last week my main lineup scored 201 points with David Johnson.
Oh my goodness, dude. That is the worst.
I to be honest with you, I'm still kind of tilting because there could have just been so much more with that lineup, regardless if I had anyone else. But I mean, it's okay. I think I'm anti-Cardinals now. I think we've talked about this the last few weeks with all the hype. You got to play Larry Fitzgerald. Oh, you got to play Kyle Murray here. All these great plays, but in reality, I mean, outside of this Chase Edmonds nonsense that we've seen this past week, going into New Orleans now, is this going to be another situation where people gravitate to Larry Fitzgerald, to these Cardinals offense and Chase Edmonds once again?
No, I mean, I don't think you can, right? I think pretty decent pass D when you're talking about the Saints defense. And then I'm just fed up with this team too. I feel like we talk about this all the time. This is like the first week I actually just flat out just uncheck everyone in this team. Like for what? They don't do anything, right? Like they do absolutely nothing. And I feel like I'm a broken record talking about these guys, but they don't throw downfield. They don't score touchdowns through the air. All they do is run. They think this new air raid, which isn't an air raid at all, is some sort of phenomenon, and it's just not. Like Kyler Murray I think he's a average quarterback at best. I mean, that's what he looks like. All he is just really fast. But I mean, he's still a rookie. They don't throw downfield. Larry Fitz does nothing but run 5-yard slants. The other receivers are just not even viable in fantasy. And then DJ is all of a sudden not playing. He's questionable. Again, we're in the same predicament. Is he going to play? Is he not going to play? If he doesn't play, obviously Edmonds is in play. But if he does, I mean, even if he does, like I don't even know if I want DJ. I don't know how much he'll play really. So just wipe out this whole team for me. I feel confident in saying they probably won't lose me a tournament if I don't play them.
Kyle Murray is someone who has struggled significantly against good defenses this year so far. If you look at the game log of what he's done and what he's produced, okay, he had 3 touchdowns against Atlanta. As we know, Atlanta, horrible defense, right? Then he has 2 touchdowns against Detroit in that late comeback kind of, who really knows what to make of that game. I mean, Detroit dominated them the first 3 quarters. I think we can all agree to that. And then somehow in garbage time and in overtime, he, came together and produced somewhat of a game line. But, then he faced Baltimore, no touchdowns. Seattle, no touchdowns. Even Cincinnati, no touchdowns. Giants, no touchdowns. There's not much upside here with him. I mean, even last week against the Giants, a team that you would want to throw against, a team that has a very young, inexperienced secondary that has given up a lot to opposing offenses this year as far as the passing game. 0 touchdowns, 104 yards, Manny. And, I mean, barely any even rushing yards at 28 rushing yards. So, with this Kyle Murray train, I agree with you. I think at best he's average. And who's to know? Maybe there's a lot of growth that needs to happen, and maybe a little bit more maturity in the game and a little bit more awareness. But I guess maybe let's talk about the opposite side of the ball, and I believe that's the Saints. They're in a very good matchup here, Manny, against this Arizona team. Where do you feel like the plays are necessary? And also, we saw Latavius Murray last week break out against a Chicago defense that is a little bit, I guess, skeptical on a lot of people's radars right now to see if they're really a true defense as what we've seen the last 2 weeks with what Josh Jacobs and Latavius Murray have done against them in the running game. Do we go back to that play again in Latavius Murray if Alvin Kamara is out?
Yeah, so Kamara got a limited practice, and the thing was that he would come back this week, right? So if he does come back, obviously Latavius Murray is out of question. But if Kamara doesn't play, then yeah, you have to love Latavius. So for me, it's just who plays and then who do you like, right? We mention all the time that this is a great matchup for pretty much every single position too, right? They're in the bottom. They're like 26th, 27th in every single category in defense. Like they're awful on defense, talking Arizona, right? And then the speculation was Breeze would have come back this week. I think he's had really, really limited practice. It hasn't been confirmed. They also have a bye week in week 9. I don't know why they'd even rush back Drew Brees before then. It's also worth noting that Teddy Bridgewater has not lost since he took over. So there really isn't any reason for anyone to really, or for them to really rush Drew Brees back. That's my whole thing, right? They're currently 5-1, or 6-1, or whatever it is with Teddy Bridgewater playing. Like, I don't know why you'd rush back. I don't know why you would rush back Teddy Bridgewater. So for me, it's if Bridgewater plays, I think he's a deep GPP target. He's always one of those guys that you can rely on. That's going to be like 5% owned or less. But in this matchup, has the ability to throw 3 touchdowns and maybe 300 yards. Michael Thomas, no matter who's quarterback, seems to be getting double-digit targets. So you love Michael Thomas every single week. And as long as that price hovers around $8K, I think I'm okay going there. He's had double-digit targets in every week except 2, and one of those was 9 targets, and he caught all 9 targets. It's just Michael Thomas. That's just what he does. So if you wanted to go to either one of those guys, totally fine. Again, it's tough for me to predict what will happen on the Saints side only because every single person has a good matchup. But yeah, if they just focus on Kamara and Michael Thomas, I'm confident they could have pretty decent games.
I believe that this week, since it is an easier matchup for this team and it's at home, I do feel like it would be smart to maybe hold off on Breeze and Kamara one more week, especially if they're going to go into a bye week. But I think here's the thing. I want to talk about Michael Thomas real quick. I feel like he's a must play. I think the way that the Saints have established this game plan, it's pretty simple. Run the ball, and then they throw it to Mike Thomas.
Yep.
There's not too many passes going to other receivers. And regardless of his price point, he seems to be someone that you can rely on to get the target share, to get the production, and to find the end zone. I think he'll have a tough test with Patrick Peterson. But once again, talent is always superior to the defensive matchup, right? And so I believe that he's probably, for me, a must start, especially in a game where, I mean, this is a high over under. It's 48.5. Points have to come somewhere, and them being a 9.5 point favorite right now, I can definitely see a lot of production going to Michael Thomas.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I have him as a top 3, top 4 wide receiver this week. Yep.
Next game, Chargers at the Bears, over under 41. We saw very interesting game from the Bears last week. I must say, Mitchell Trubisky looked horrible. He had got some production late in that game. That was garbage time. That really, I don't consider that anything effective to his overall game last week. But we're going into a game here where the Chargers as well have just absolutely been a different team since Melvin Gordon has come back. I feel like the game plan has been, let's try to make Melvin Gordon happy. I don't know what Anthony Lynn is thinking with not utilizing Austin Eckler as much as he possibly can, because even on a smaller role right now, Eckler is still producing at a high level. And last week, they don't even get into that game and have a chance to win without Eckler. And so looking at this game, there are some interesting things because Keenan Allen might be out and Mike Williams seems to be shooting up in this depth chart. But do we attack this Bears defense when it's weak and vulnerable? Where do you see yourself going in this game, if at all?
Yeah, this is a tough one because it's not just a backfield question mark that we have every single week now. It's now Keenan Allen all of a sudden was limited in Thursday's practice. I think we have to wait for today's report to see if he's really in question or not. But he didn't practice on Thursday, and all of a sudden dealing with a hamstring issue. Remember, this is a team that's already extremely thin, has no Inman, has no Travis Benjamin, and now could, I don't know, has a questionable Keenan Allen. All of a sudden, Mike Williams, who isn't even healthy from week to week, is probably the most healthiest on this team. So that's pretty weird. He's also pretty cheap across the industry. And if you look at DK, that's the cheapest Mike Williams has been all season. So, and I think the reason is obviously they're facing Chicago. It's in Chicago. And anytime you hear the name, the Chicago Bears, like, oh, these guys are great. I mean, we can't play them or whatever, but we just saw them get steamrolled last week. They don't look like a good team. And it's one of those things where, listen, your defense can be good, but if you're going to make them play 24/7 and they don't even have a time to rest, the fatigue is finally going to set in. And that's what we saw last week from that defense. So if something like that happens again, yeah, I think not only is Mike Williams in play, but this could possibly be Melvin Gordon's or Eckler's first really good week, right? Because I think they could be in a decent game script here. Chicago's awful, man. And I kind of don't agree with Vegas here to the point that, they are favorites only because they're at home and the Chargers do have some injury scares right now, but it's an awful team. That's an awful offense. They are like outside of Khalil Mack on defense. This team is kind of overrated. I don't know if you feel the same way, but like it's a pretty overrated Chicago team. I don't know. I think there is some production here. I'm leaning Mike Williams for now, but today's report has a big impact on what I do with this team for sure.
The thing I would say about the Bears is that they don't have an identity.
No, they don't even have good players, honestly. They don't even have good players.
I really feel bad for Allen Robinson because he's very talented, and he just has got the short end of the stick so far in his NFL career with the quarterbacks that have been paired up with him. Yep. And, if he goes to a team like with Aaron Rodgers, I mean, my God, imagine the amount of production that he would have as a wideout, considering what we're seeing already with him with quarterbacks that are just nowhere near that caliber talent of quarterback position. But the running game is absolutely horrible for the Bears. Montgomery is not good.
No, nothing at all.
And Tariq Cohen is not being utilized like the way he once was, and nor do I feel like he just has they have a game plan for him. It's just, I don't think there's anyone possible besides Allen Robinson that you could roster from this team.
Yeah, I talked about it with Lofty too, and we spent quite some time on this team. He ended up mentioning, dude, I think everyone should consider dropping Tariq Cohen. And I was like, Tariq Cohen? At least Tariq Cohen gets 9 catches for his 20 yards. David Montgomery gets nothing. Literally has gotten nothing the whole season. Like, look at that. You think Tariq Cohen's game log is bad. Look at David Montgomery. Drop David Montgomery. Like, I'm sorry for the people that drafted him in that 5th round, right? And in DFS, has he ever been a play so far this season? Like, I can't recall. Like, there's no running game. They ran the ball like, I know it was, I think it was 8 or 9 times, but that's also a fraud because I think 1 or 2 were Trubisky. They did an end around or whatever. Like, the actual running backs had like 5 carries. It was like, that's terrible. Horrible. So for me, it's, I don't know, man. Like, first of all, I never roster any one of these cats. They're awful, but I don't even think I want to the whole season. Like, especially if they're not going to do anything. No.
So here's the best thing is, no matter how anti-Bears we are, the funny thing about this is the fact that the Chargers are in the bottom third of rush defense in the NFL. So it will be hilarious if we have this take and then they just come out and Nagy just has this crazy running game plan. And then once again, I'm just going to have to bite that bullet next week.
No, I mean, listen, David Montgomery had 2 attempts last week. The week before he had 11. The week before he had 21. And in none of those games, from 2 carries all the way to 21 carries, did he pass 10 fantasy points. Mm-hmm. Like, this guy's bad, dude. Like, he doesn't do anything. You can give him 20 carries. You can give him 2 carries. Same production. Like, it's terrible.
The final guy I want to touch on is someone who's kind of really bounced back from an injury, and it's nice to see him producing, is Hunter Henry. He's definitely someone who is not only producing at a high level, not from the tight end position, but he's being targeted like a wide receiver. And that's huge when it comes to production, especially for the tight end position in DFS. So any type of love for Hunter Henry?
Yeah, top 4 tight end for me. I'll continue playing him. I liked him last week. I still like him this week, especially if Keenan is hobbled a little bit. And you're right, he's giving you wide receiver production. Had 8 targets and 9 targets the last 2 games, respectfully. And he had 97 yards, almost had the 100-yard bonus 2 games in a row. So, yeah, I love Hunter Henry, especially if he's going to get that much volume. And obviously with the injuries to that wide receiving core, you bump up Henry a little more. I think you're right.
The next game, we travel to London, Cincinnati against Los Angeles, over under 48. Rams are big favorites at minus 13. Last week, we saw Andy Dalton throw 3 picks in 4 straight passing attempts, which was pretty amazing against the Jacksonville defense. we saw the Rams bounce back after loss to 49ers. They looked pretty damn good against the Falcons and really shut down the Falcons offense. I think a lot of people last week was thinking that game would be a shootout, and it was in one way where one team just dominated. This Rams defense has kind of transformed a little bit now. And I say that because Jalen Ramsey brings a different type of element. If you saw the game last week, what they did was they applied a lot of pressure to the quarterback, but in doing so, they played really tight man-to-man coverage with limited zone. The last few weeks prior to that, they kind of opened up the field for opposing offenses with the way that their defensive schemes were. And I think right now what they're doing is they're trusting the skill set of Ramsey to allow to be able to do more man-to-man coverage and blitz packages to cause more pressure. And I really think that this is a trouble game for the Cincinnati Bengals and Andy Dalton.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awful offense to begin with. I don't know how Tyler Boyd can have 14 targets and just 5 catches, right? Like, it's obviously not him that's terrible, but and he's only had 3 drops the last 2 weeks. So for those wondering how many of these are drops, the last 21 targets he's received, it's been just 3 drops. Andy Dalton's not accurate. Andy Dalton's not good. That's the answer to those 14 targets. So listen, targets are great. And here's I'm mentioning all of this because even in bad matchups, he gets all the targets. That's everyone's excuse for Boyd, right? Even in good matchups, obviously he does well, but in bad matchups, at least he's getting targets. Targets from Andy Dalton that come nowhere close to your receiver aren't really targets, right? Like, I can say I'm throwing to you, but if I throw it 5 yards over your head, like, it's not, you're never going to catch it. So that's still a target, right? So for me, it's, listen, I think if you want to play Boyd, no, it's a volume only, like a terrible volume only. And I think that's fine. But what happens if he sees Jalen Ramsey? And I know he sees a lot from the slot or whatever, and I don't know if Ramsey's going to travel with him or shadow him at all or whatever. But, I mean, this is still a really – it's a much better defense than we saw in previous weeks. You're totally right. And this is still an awful offense. It's almost a 2-touchdown spread in favor of the Rams. I don't know, man. It's a lot of Rams, and obviously it's pick your poison. They all have a good matchup, really. Could even be the running game to an extent. But it's for me, the question really is what you're going to do with Boyd. Everyone in the Rams is in play, obviously.
I agree with you with the target breakdown. I can't pay for targets and not get any production because you don't get points for targets. Right. And, in 7 games this year, he's only been looked at in the red zone only 3 times. Out of all these targets, he's only had 3 red zone targets the entire season. And I think that's a concern to me as well. And I think you made a great point, is that I think at some points we will see Jalen Ramsey on him. But even outside of that, I just don't know if Dalton will have enough time in the pocket to be able to hit him a majority of the time. And I really feel like this is going to be a defensive play for me with the Rams. I really like the defensive play here. And on the other side of the ball, let's talk about this Rams offense, because they're going to be going up against one of the worst, if not the worst, defense in the league in some areas. There's a lot of weapons on this Rams team. What I'm seeing right now is I really like Todd Gurley. And, I'm going to have to stay with him this week because last week I liked him as well. They utilized him in some ways that I was happy with. In the passing game, he scored that touchdown. And then he also got stuffed at the goal line a couple times. So he could have had a much more upside game than what was being actually present to us at the box score. Any love for Todd Gurley and any love for this passing offense, considering the favorites that they are and the over-under as well.
Yeah, I wish he went back to like being old Todd Gurley when he would get 25 to 30 touches in a game. But I guess all we have now is about 20 touches a game, and we should be okay with that. Listen, it's a good play because it's Cincinnati, right? It is Cincinnati. And I guess playing 60% of snaps for Gurley is okay too. It feels weird because such a dominant player all of a sudden gets used or at least plays 60% of the game and then gets used for about 20 touches in a game. So, but even if 20 touches against the Bengals, obviously way more than enough. They're going to score at will. They're at home. They're favorites, 3 down back. You have everything you want for a person or a running back you want to play. And anytime those boxes are checked for me, yeah, they're obviously a really good play. So I'm with you on Gurley. Again, I'll just reiterate, this is a good matchup for every single person on this offense. The problem is they're pretty expensive, right? Cooper Kupp being 75. Like, how do you justify paying that much for, a game where it could be Gurley, it could be Goff to, I don't know, a tight end, it could be Goff to Woods, Cooks, backups, it could be Goff to whoever. That's the only issue I have anytime a team plays Cincy or Miami or one of those teams. It's when you all have good matchups, I can't play you all. You're not going to score 100, and you all can't score 25 plus to win me a tournament. So you got to pick and choose your spots here.
The Bengals are the worst run defense in football. They give up 189 yards per game on the ground. The production's got to come from somewhere, right? And I think that since they're a dual threat offensive team, this Bengals team also has to worry about all those weapons in the passing game. And so the one thing that only concerns me in this matchup is what I've seen so far with this running game, and it was last week as well, is it's the offensive line that doesn't give him also holes to run through. There's a lot of times where you see this offensive line collapse and defenses are stopping him in the backfield. So he's not really getting a chance to break out for these plays and to see that opportunity happen. And so I think that if we can see an offensive line, control the line of scrimmage and give him some holes, and you're facing a rush defense that's, the worst in the league, I feel like there's some upside there. Yes, there's a lot of caution, but once again, this guy, he still has some talent in him. And I feel like if we can just see it one time, what better time to see it than against the worst rush defense?
Just one time. Still doesn't have a 100-yard game and is pretty much averaging 3.5 yards per carry on the season, if not a little bit less, I'd say. Outside of the outlier that was week 1, and I say outlier because he had 97 yards for this new Gurley standards. That's pretty high. So I don't know. I think he's in a good spot. All we can do is play probabilities, right? And he has a really good matchup against a really bad team. So
our next game, Jets at Jaguars, over under 41. Jaguars 5.5-point favorites at home. Sam Darnold still recovering from seeing ghosts on the field, I guess. He'll now take his Halloween situation to Jacksonville, where Leonard Fournette, once again, one of the highest projected owned players on Osmo's projections model, which makes sense. Volume monster. Hasn't necessarily hit where we would want him to hit the last couple weeks, but I think that based on the volume, he was still able to produce somewhat and salvage himself in some areas of his production. But how do we feel about this game from the Jets side first, and then going to the Jacksonville side next?
Jets side first. I mean, what do we even want from the Jets? That's number one. They looked. I mean, Darnold. Listen, when you yourself say you're seeing ghosts, brother, that's pretty concerning, man. Like, I don't know, dude. They should have benched him halfway through that third quarter. I don't even know what they continued playing him for. There's no tight end that's viable here. There's no wide receiver really that's viable unless you think, I don't know, Demarius, Robbie Anderson, these cats. And there really isn't a viable running back either because they're down 24/7. And Le'Veon Bell cannot have 20 rush attempts in a game because they never have the lead, right? This is another really good running back that hasn't had a 100-yard game this season. And all of a sudden, the last 2 weeks, he is invisible in the passing game, which is where he at least was getting you some points in weeks 1 and 2. So Le'Veon's not viable. The quarterback is clearly not viable. So I have nothing from the Jets. And then if you're talking the other side of the ball, I mean, Leonard Fournette just touches. The only thing, he hasn't had touchdowns. That's the only thing. That's the only thing we're missing, right? There's no touchdowns. Last 2 weeks he hasn't scored, but he has he had 31 touches last week, and then he had 26 touches the week before. Sign me up for 25 plus touches again against a really bad team, period. But then at home and your favorites, all the boxes are checked again, man. It's a bunch of Leonard Fournette for me. No real interest in the passing game. I guess if you wanted D.D. Westbrook, I think that's okay. But again, didn't participate in practice on Thursday. So I don't know if he goes or not. The safe bet here would be Leonard Fournette for sure.
Yeah, safe bet, Leonard Fournette. Totally agree. Volume monster, as we know. I mean, the guy is second to Christian McCaffrey as far as someone you can trust for the amount of volume that he gets. I will say this real quick. I think Gardner Minshew is a great tournament play. Jets passing defense is really weak and vulnerable, especially in the slot. And I really like the call on D.D. Westbrook. 16 catches, 250 yards last 3 games, 28 targets in the last 3 games as well. But I think either way, DJ Shark or D.D. Westbrook could be in line for a big game. Gardner Minshew, we can't discredit him in some ways because three of the 6 games this year, over 40 yards rushing. That's 6th best amongst quarterbacks as far as rushing yards. And I mean, he does air it out. He's not as accurate as we would want, but I do feel like there is some vulnerability here in the Jets defense, passing defense, especially against the slot, that could open for some production as far as fantasy purposes.
Yeah, for sure. YouTube's getting at me saying I'm showing too much leg and I know Gase way too much. Okay, no more leg. And yeah, Gase is awful. Jets are awful. That's my answer to you guys.
I don't know why they have Adam Gase still there. It just
whoever said this guy was a good coach. Where did they get this from? He's awful.
It's that bad. I'm a Jets fan, so it's embarrassing. And for me to continue to see the horrible hirings, the horrible play calling, I mean, it's just. I mean, now we got quarterbacks seeing ghosts, man. Like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's terrible team.
It's embarrassing. Terrible. Giants at Lions. 49.5 over under. Lions 7-point favorites. I guess we can finally talk about the regression of Daniel Jones because he's regressed each and every single game since that Buccaneers start where everyone said that he was the next star. Let's talk about this Giants offense and Barkley, who is projected to be somewhat highly owned. I'm just confused because Evan Ingram had the best matchup last week, man. How could you not get more than 1 catch against the worst passing defense when it comes to tight ends in the league?
Feels like it deals with coaching too, right? Because like the good teams that have faced Arizona have all passed their tight end and come up with wins. The teams that have lost don't find their tight ends at all and lose to what I think is a terrible team in Arizona. But here, I guess we have one even worse. Danny Jones has regressed big time. And if you want to complain about matchup, that's so inaccurate because, and I'm not speaking to you, the people that want to complain about matchups, right? Arizona, very, very good matchup at 13 fantasy points. He played New England and Minnesota. We'll give him a pass. But then he played Washington and still had 14 fantasy points, even though they won in that game. So, yeah, it's been brutal. The only 300-yard game he has is that Tampa game. So, really, what is the upside in Danny Jones? You then factor in the matchup this week, and it's like, well, I don't know, man. I actually think I want to pass again on Danny Jones, really, and I want to play some of Saquon, but like he's pretty darn expensive, and if I could take the savings with Fournette and get just as much, if not more, touches than Saquon, I'll gladly take that too. I think there's some pretty solid value at running back too, to the point where I might be just foregoing all of this except Evan Ingram. I hope he bounces back. That's pretty much all I'm banking on. But that's pretty much all I have from this game, and that's because he came back down to a $5,300 price tag on DK, talking Ingram. So that's really the only interest I have. Just is it me, or is the skill gap in all of these teams in the NFL it's gotten bigger as the season has gone on? Like, there are just some bottom of the barrel teams that have no business being in the league. And then there's just really, really good teams. There's no in between. Like, I feel like it's either you tank or you try to make the playoffs and be the best team you can. There's no in between.
I feel like there would be a little bit more effort, though, too. I mean,
sure, right?
Yeah, if you're looking to at least try to make it a game and at least win, I mean, at least have some play calling that justifies that. For me, I'm not really too high on this Giants side of the ball, but I do like Barkley in some areas just because he is Saquon, and I feel like they need to give him the ball more. I mean, I'm tired of these 16, 18 carries. I want to see more production of him, and I want to see more pass catching opportunities for him as well. That's where kind of he broke out last year, was those big pass catching plays. But on the other side of the ball, let's talk about this real quick. Marvin Jones last week, as we know, had 4 touchdowns. Absolutely incredible. Matt Stafford, best game of his season last week, 364 yards, and all 4 of those touchdowns going to Jones. But I think the guy I want to focus on this week is maybe a bounce back game for Kenny Galladay. Last week he was covered by Xavier Rhodes, and the Vikings do have a good secondary to some extent. But what I think for me is Galladay is going to be facing a very weak Giants secondary, very young, very inexperienced, and very vulnerable. Gives up a lot of big passing plays. Any love for this passing game of the Lions?
Yeah, you have to, right? The Giants are almost 30th against the pass this year, and doesn't look like it's going to get much better. Also, the injury on one side to Kerryon Johnson, maybe they pass a little bit more, right? I think, yeah, it could be all systems go for Galladay this week, and it's obviously a much better matchup than he had last week. So if you're on the what have you done for me lately train, like this is a perfect spot to come back to Kenny Galladay. Obviously, the upside's there, the targets should be there. They should have a lead. They should put up points on the board. They're almost touchdown favorites, almost a 50 total. Like it's all shaping up to be a pretty good passing day for the Lions. And yeah, if that's the case, then Galladay has to be in play.
Bucks at Titans, 45 over under. Titans 2.5-point favorites. I think Jameis Winston had the most disgusting game ever coming off of that London beating where he had 6 turnovers. He threw for 400 yards, but he had 6 turnovers. And he's going to be facing a Titans defense that's, I guess, somewhat respectful in some areas. I mean, you got to respect them. But this game, do we see anything that we're seeing from any sides of the ball here?
No, listen, Tennessee's awful too. Tannehill, I know Tannehill very well too. Not a good quarterback. I think put up decent numbers last week, but that's probably his ceiling. I don't think you can get much more from Tannehill, especially with this receiving core. Do I think Brown is okay? Sure. Do I think Davis is all right? Sure. But they aren't big time receivers that can maybe win you. I don't think they could win me a tournament. That's the problem, right? And even though this is a higher total than we usually see for Tennessee, and they are technically favorites, albeit by very little, I still don't know if I can go here, right? Like even Derrick Henry to an extent, like outside of your 22 inefficient touches per game or 20 inefficient touches per game, like there's nothing I really, really like here, right? Like I at least you tell me. I don't have anything. AJ Brown may be the only guy, but it's also what have you done for me lately because he had 8 targets for 64 yards, right? That's the only reason. There's nothing really here to like, I think.
I think once again I have to talk about Derrick Henry. 6,000 on DraftKings, 6,900 on FanDuel. He's a workhorse and he's going to get his 20 carries or a little bit under that. But also, being a 2.5-point favorite at home and looking at Tannehill, it's like you said, he had a ceiling game last week, right? But also, I mean, this defense is not necessarily that good. And the only thing I do respect, though, is their rushing defense. And that's what scares me about Henry. But his price point and the way that he's showing up is that he could be somewhat of a nice tournament play. And so outside of that, though, once again, this is an area where I can just talk about last week with Latavius Murray going up against Chicago. Very good rush defense, right? But he absolutely ran all over them. I feel like this week as well, we could see maybe a similar type of situation with that with Derrick Henry. I feel like, with him last week, they relied on him heavily, especially late in that game, and running the rock. I mean, 22 carries, 90 yards, and a touchdown. The only thing I would like to see more is maybe a little bit more pass catching opportunities. But I feel like at his price point, it could definitely justify worth rostering as far as a GDP play.
Yeah, fair enough. It's a volume play. I currently have 0 out of 150. I think the guy's awful, but I am not a fan of Henry. But the volume is definitely there. He gets so many touches. It's by default you have a pretty solid floor if you're carrying the ball 20 times or touching the ball 20 times per game. So yeah, I can see that.
Just a couple more games, guys. Then we're going to go ahead and get out of here. But don't forget, once again, if you guys haven't signed up yet for Osmo.com, if you're looking to use the projection models, all the nice inside articles as well behind the paywall, the stacking tools, everything that is provided as far as tools and resources from the number 1 player in the world himself, Alex Osmo Baker. Go ahead. You can go to the NFL landing page for all the NFL content and tools that you can get. There's videos there that break down everything that you can go and get before you actually get it, so that way you know what you're getting. And if you want to use the code NFL Strategy, it'll get you 50% off your first month. Check out the articles. There's links everywhere for you to sign up, but the code is NFL Strategy. All right, one of the last few games, Manny, as we go into this, we just talked about, certain plays in this game as far as not being useful from the Bucks and Titans. But Another game as well that might be interesting because of how good the Buffalo Bills defense is the Eagles at Bills, 43 over under. Bills 1.5-point favorites. Anything here?
I don't play running backs from either of these teams. Do you? I don't.
Nah.
Wide receivers. Oh man, like the Bills wide receivers are just so uninspiring. Like, sure, maybe because they have some like Josh Allen needs to pass to someone, but and then same thing for the Eagles receivers. Like these guys, I think are maybe even worse. I don't know. Like, dang, I have nothing. And then Zach Ertz has been like double teamed the entire season to the point where does he even have 10 fantasy points in one game? The whole like this is another guy. He has one touchdown the whole season. Like talk about no upside for a guy that just broke a record last season. Like this is I'm sorry to say, wherever Lofty is, his team's garbage, man. Like that team sucks. No interest in Dallas Goedert. That's like touchdown or bust. I have nothing from this game, to be honest. Nothing.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe the Bills defense, but outside of that, let's go ahead and talk about the Panthers at 49ers, 42 over under. 49ers 5.5-point favorites. McCaffrey's back on the main slate. Are we going to run him against this stout San Francisco 49ers defense?
So that's just a volume play, right? Okay, so it depends how good you really think this Niners D is. I think they might be. I think they might be the truth. If there's any way you beat them, though, it is through the ground, right? It is through the ground. So McCaffrey, just by default, because of volume, always in play. The thing is, he's up there in price, man. He's 9,200 on DK, and rightfully so. I mean, the guy's touching the ball 30 times a game. It feels like so. You're definitely getting the volume, but this is just a really tough matchup. Really tough matchup through the air too. If you're looking at Vegas and you believe Vegas has this as a really, really low scoring game. It's McCaffrey or nothing from this team, but even then I think there's just way better use of your salary on pretty much every site than going McCaffrey. Because of that, I think he should be low owned, right? But even then I think too tough of a matchup for that price tag.
Yeah, the rush defense DVOA for the 49ers is negative 14%, ranks number 1 in the league. It's going to be the toughest task, I think. Number 8 in rush yards allowed as well for the 49ers. It's going to be definitely a difficult matchup for McCaffrey, but once again, it's Christian McCaffrey, the volume. It's just really hard to pass up and completely fade him regardless of the matchup. And, for me personally, I'm going to have to roster him no matter what.
Sure, fair enough.
But the 49ers side of the ball, Garoppolo is someone who he's not good for fantasy.
No, not at all.
He is a good football manager. He is a good quality quarterback when it comes to real game football. But fantasy purposes, he is not someone that you want to roster. And I would highly, just advise that, for him, he's not going to get you that ceiling type of play that you're looking for in a quarterback to be sneaky in a tournament.
Not at all.
I would say this, though. I think Kittle can be in play. I know that it's been difficult really getting the volume that we're looking for in Kittle because of how talented he is. But, outside of that, their running game between Breida and Coleman is 50-50, and their wide receivers is really nothing to hone in on.
Yeah, so they don't have a wide receiver that's fantasy viable either. Tevin Coleman, maybe because they run the ball so much, right? And you're right, Garoppolo doesn't have a 300-yard passing game this season. He's eclipsed 20 fantasy points just one, and that was in week 2 against Cincinnati. Doesn't mean a damn thing. And then, Kittle would be the only one, but similar to Ertz, like because of their inability to, produce through the passing game, like he's had an okay season. Like it's been all right, but definitely not how if you're playing season long and you drafted him second overall or second in tight ends, like I don't think he's produced number 2 tight end numbers really. So I don't know from this. I never really roster many Niners players, if any at all, outside of Kittle. So yeah, I think it'll be Kittle or bust here. And even then I think there are a handful of tight ends you like better.
One more game, Manny. Just to let you know, people are freaking out that we didn't mention John Brown. Any comment on that before we go into this final game?
I run 150 lineups. I like to think, I don't know, maybe I just suck at DFS now. I have no idea, but I do not have a single John Brown, no.
Okay. Raiders at Texans. Texans 6.5-point favorites at home, over under 51.5. Man, DeAndre Hopkins season finally broke out with that 9 catches, 106 yards, and a touchdown. You've been waiting 6 long weeks for that, huh?
Bro, I've been waiting forever, man. Why I'm not playing John Brown is because this game alone has some pretty good spots, specifically the size. So go to DeAndre Hopkins, number one again. That's a very good play, phenomenal play. 12 targets each of the last 2 weeks. Almost had identical stat lines, except 12 targets, 9 catches, 106 and a touchdown. 12 targets, 9 catches, 55 and no touchdowns. He's such a good receiver, man. Arguably the game's best, right? So I you just go back to him every single time they face Oakland. I think obviously a pretty good matchup, and then Deshaun Watson is just going to do Deshaun Watson thing. So not only do you have maybe a top 3 quarterback here, you have a top 3 receiver here. You probably have top 3 value in Kenny Stills too. When Fuller went down last week, Kenny Stills saw almost 100% of those snaps. And if that's going to be the case, then I definitely want some Kenny Stills at sub 5K. And then if you guys are QT fans, I think that's okay too. Saw about 60 to 70% of snaps and did okay with him. We know he has the ability to put up big games too. So any of these 3, if I had to rank them, obviously Hopkins, it would then be Stills and QT, but all of them pretty much in play. And then Darren Waller has always been, at least every single week, has been a top tight end. When you are getting double-digit targets, or close to it at least. He had another 8 last week for 126 and 2. He's clearly the number 1 there. Anytime you could get wide receiver production at tight end, I'm all in favor of that. And then I don't know what this Josh Jacobs thing or what's going on with him. I don't know if he'll play or not, but if he does, I think he's obviously in play. That's who they rely on outside of the passing game. I think they have to. They don't have a choice. And then if he doesn't play, it's not so much looking for value there. I think they got to pass a little bit more and try to keep up with Houston. So a pretty juicy game, by far everyone's favorite though.
Kenny Stills, obviously if Will Fuller's out, with this, he came back probably in a little bit of a big way. He had 4 catches for over 100 yards. He has some speed. He certainly gets a boost in target share and production. If Fuller doesn't play. Now here's the thing though: the Oakland pass defense, it's one of the worst in football. So Stills becomes very attractive, essentially, but he's not projected to be as owned as we probably would think. Would you say that Stills is a solid GBP play?
Yeah, for sure. You obviously have the home run upside because he does stretch the field too. And if you are going to be in an offense with Deshaun Watson, where, listen, we saw Fuller put up, okay, so he put up big numbers that one game, but the next 2 games or the next game, he had all the targets to do it again. He just kept dropping them in the end zone, or it was right off his fingertips in the end zone. He could have very well put up back-to-back multi-touchdown games, and we didn't end up seeing it because it just didn't work out, but he was open downfield and everything. So it's, if you still have those targets going to other guys outside of DeAndre Hopkins, then you have to like Stills for that price tag. So I think I'm there, yeah.
And I think one thing to kind of make note of is Garyon Conley. He just got traded to the Texans, and he was acquired from Oakland. And so this is interesting because I think that this weakens even more of the Raiders defense. And now they have him on the opposite side, and they're playing against each other this week. So it's very interesting. So sometimes in these situations, what happens is you're able to get some of the defensive schemes and pick up on the coverage because you just played for that defense. And so I feel like this is a very unique spot for the Texans offense. I feel like this is a big week for them in the passing game.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's by far the highest projected offense. Now, do they perform is a different story, but they're definitely in good spots for sure.
All right, we've come to a close. Browns at Patriots, the final one. We'll make this quick, Manny, because you got to go do your show. 46 over under. Patriots, 13-point favorites. I really have nothing to say about Baker Mayfield. I feel like he's just not that
booty.
good.
Booty.
Yeah.
He's Jarvis Landry, for what it's worth, guaranteed a win this weekend. I don't know, because your defense is ranked in the bottom 3rd. They're down there with Arizona, Oakland, Atlanta, Cincy, and Miami. So I don't know if you have all the control to make that happen. But I definitely don't like the offense. I mean, this has been such a good defense. I know a lot of people are predicting regression because of their first 7 or 8 matchups for this New England defense, and now the next 7 or 8 is actually really, really difficult, and they face much better quarterbacks. But I don't know. I'm not ready to put Baker Mayfield in that category. I think Chubb is okay. I think that's fine. I think if you want to beat this New England defense, it's tough, but I think you do it on the ground, not through the air. They have a really, really good secondary. So I think Chubb is in line for pretty decent workload and production. So I think he's okay, but it's probably going to be from the other side. I think Sonny Michel's in a good spot. Listen, you're seeing 20 plus touches from Sonny Michel now. If you give him a good matchup, it doesn't even matter if the yards are there. They're almost always in the red zone, and he's always a threat to score not just 1, but 2 TDs, right? So I actually like him quite a bit this week, especially for his price tag. I think at 5.2, pretty solid. And then if you wanted to do James White, I think that's okay. If you wanted to do any of the pass catchers, obviously because of Brady, I think Edelman's okay. But it's just a lot of running game from this game, and it's one where I kind of agree with Vegas. I think a 45, maybe even less of a total is probably accurate here.
Yeah, I really don't see how they can throw against this Patriots pass defense. Right. I feel like the way, if they have a chance at all, is on the ground. But I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think their defense can withstand this Patriots offense either.
Yep, I'm right there with you.
So I think Sonny Michel's in a great spot. I love the way that they kind of utilize him as far as they give him a lot of carries. I think that you can trust the volume. I think he has a great price point. He's not as highly owned or projected to be as highly owned currently, which I think is always nice as well when it comes to tournament play. And I think the other guy I like is Julian Edelman. I think he now is kind of fully recovered from this weird little chest injury he's had over the last few weeks. And you're looking at a Browns defense that is one of the worst against the slot wide receivers. The target share is there. I mean, last week he had 12 targets this past week, and he ran for 20 yards on 3 carries, only 7 catches for 47 yards. But here's the thing, though, is that, they didn't need to go to him as much as they did with the way that the offense ran. And then, in the second half, they really didn't throw much to him at all. So, this is a different story, though. You're looking at a matchup where it's at home. I really feel like with what he is in line to do, I think he definitely hits value and is a great GPP play.
Yep, I think I'm right there with you.
All right, guys. That's it for this Week 8 fantasy show presented by Awesemo.com and Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Before we close out, Manny, where can we find you on all areas?
Yeah, Twitter @MLaura, like my name. All of my work is on fantasycruncher.com, and then of course my live streams, which always air after I do these, pretty much strategy based, not game by game or anything, is on twitch.tv/MLaura.
And for me, you guys can find me at Chris Randone on all social media platforms. And I will say this, you guys, this weekend, continue the process, play your good players. If you feel like there's good matchups, don't be scared, don't hesitate. Try to get exposure, try to have some variance in your plays. And, to keep this show going, guys, and for all this content that we're producing, if you can, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, like the video. And we thank you guys once again. And we wish you guys a great weekend and a great week in fantasy sports, guys. Take care.